Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being your show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the season premiere of Fear the Walking Dead. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So first and foremost, at first we're relatively immediately picking up after the events of the season 7 finale, and Padre wants Morgan to be a collector, but obviously the whole thing was meant to just be a setup. It's like, no, the whole point was meant to test him, because it's like, right, bringing in a new baby at the same time as someone else coming to be a collector, it's like, no, it's too much of a coincidence. This has to be some setup. And luckily Morgan got out of there because of Madison. But it's like, yeah, for her, it's like, I'm willing to pay this price because nothing else matters. I mean, Nick is already gone. Alicia is on her way out. I mean, but we still don't know, especially after the time skip, whatever happened to Alicia. But yeah, it's for her, it's like, my daughter might be as good as gone, you know? And I've done so many terrible things, taking so many children away from their parents, you know? Whatever my reasons may have been, I did terrible things, and I'm willing to pay the price because there's nothing else that can be done to me. But Padre's like, yeah, that's not the case. So we get this sometime later. We were following this girl around Ren. She seemed like she had some trauma when it came to, as she calls them, Kerrigans. Once again, there's always that interesting thing of like, oh yeah, what does said group call? Because the only reason why can't forget, the initial Fear group had like a different name for it, because obviously the only reason why Morgan calls them Walkers is because he's from the OG show. So like, yeah, I mean, every group's got their name. Like, I think, don't they call them like Widow Teeth is what the Padre people call them, because they break their teeth and put like moss or something in their mouth. So I was like, what's the point of that? It's like, right, it's supposed to symbolize, it's almost like playing paintball. It's meant to show like where they bite you, because obviously it's like, okay, you got bit there. I mean, obviously all it takes is one bite, but it's like, yeah, like, okay, you got bit here, bit there, like minus points because you got bit all over the place. I had to look it up. I was curious whether or not the actress who plays Ren, she seemed familiar to me. Her name is Zoe Merchant, but I'm like, I don't know if this is like her first thing or not, acting wise, like, or at least like kind of on the bigger side of like projects, but I didn't really see a lot come up, but I didn't really read too much. But it's like, that actress seems familiar, but maybe that's just my imagination or whatever. I just don't know what I would know her from. But either way, we got introduced to Ren, and we're getting a little bit of the Padre situation of just kind of like, I mean, well, because it's like, hey, we've got these kids, and they're training, and they're learning. It's meant to be like, because Padre isn't trying to rebuild the world into what it was before. They're trying to build something new. It's so interesting that this Padre situation has turned into what it was. Because it was like this MacGuffin, especially for Alicia. For it to kind of turn out to what it is now is so interesting that it would kind of manifest itself in this way. That was kind of surprising. Like, I don't know if this is going to be on the same level as like the CR and stuff like that. It feels like it is, but it might just be another, I mean, maybe there's some correlation, or maybe it's just like this is its own thing, and it's just going to be its pocket thing. Like, it's not going to be as massive as the CR, because it doesn't seem like it's as big. But also like the obsession with like saving kids. I guess in the thought process is these kids are young enough that their minds can be molded toward, because they are young enough to not, it's kind of a little bit of a Thanos thing of, these kids are young enough, they don't know what the world was, so they're not likely to make those same mistakes. Whereas everyone else is fighting to survive. Those who are want to rebuild something are rebuilding it off the basis of what they remember what the world was like. You know, once again, Thanos' point was, right, my biggest mistake was wiping away half the population. I should have killed everyone that remembers what the world originally was, because those remembering what it originally was means you got something to fight for. You have memories of something to aim towards, so you're going to fight to try and rebuild what was rather than what could be. So that ends up being kind of Padre's thing, but that's my only explanation of why you go out of your way to like get these kids, and like what you are fully educating them on. We see some of the classes, but we don't know the full scale of like what they're being taught. But obviously we've seen so many different communities kind of applied in this regard. I guess it's almost supposed to be like very like militaristic. I mean, it's also like really sad because it's very child soldier-esque. either way, going back to it, like I said, there's this whole thing with Ren, and obviously she has some trauma related to the walkers, and I was like, are we supposed to know what that trauma is associated with? Because do know at the time of me recording this, I still have not finished The Walking Dead. I still have not seen the final 2 episodes. Plus, I need to finish Tales of the Walking Dead. I don't know how much, at least Tales, I don't know how much of an effect it's going to have on this season. That's probably just its own thing, but I'd still rather like be complete with my cinematic Walking Dead universe stuff. But either way, tangents and all that aside, so I didn't know if that was something I was missing. I was like I say, because something about the actress seemed familiar, so I was like, do I recognize her from something that was Walking Dead related? I just wasn't sure. And so she's like, the thing is, she can fight, and I also thought it was interesting, like, they're doing the whole pole situation, like, I was like, because obviously that's a Morgan specialty. I mean, obviously it was an Eastman specialty, but it's also a Morgan specialty that he's kind of like talked to other people too, but it's like the Kingdom utilized that as well, if I remember correctly. So it's not that out there, but it just seems so interesting. I was like, huh. So when it's all said and done, Ren ends up by accident, and maybe just on some universal level, it's all works out like this. She ends up finding Madison locked up. So Madison's been locked up this entire time. We see the tallies on the wall. So we can obviously tell she's been here for a hot minute. And so she's been locked up. They're constantly drawing blood from her, which I'm like, what's that about? I was like, is that why her arm's jacked up the way it is? But she explains later on it's because she wasn't always so receptive to them drawing blood, but she's kind of given up. She had already kind of given up last season, but I mean, at the end of last season, but also the fact is, like, for her, it's like the last thing I can do is help Morgan and Mo get away, and then it's all good. But later on, she gets help from Ren because Ren's like, hey, you help me train and I will help you, because she like, hey, I need you to turn off this valve. It's like, well, what will happen? It's like, pretty much what you think it will, because she wants to die. She's like, I've served my purpose. You're only keeping me alive to torture me. And because they're making sure, like, no, Padre knows that he could still get something out of you, so you're worth keeping around. For what purpose? I don't know, whether just experimental stuff, but yeah, because obviously she's not eating and stuff like that. But that lady, which if I'm not mistaken, wasn't she in Teen Wolf back in the day? Like the TV show? Wasn't she like the Banshee that, oh God, Lydia like got introduced to? If I remember correctly, I think that's the same actress. I could be mistaken. Either way, she was like, yeah, we have ways of making you eat. But it's like she had just given up. And then her attempt to unalive herself didn't go well because Ren ended up stopping her. Because Ren had heard about, like, what she did. Like, apparently when she helped Morgan escape, she killed, like, half a dozen people. She ended up killing a whole bunch of walkers. They're saying, like, she did all that with a sledgehammer, too. So, yeah, she's extremely dangerous. But then we get the reveal of Morgan, Madison being like, wait, where'd you get that scar from? I was like, wait, why is that so significant? And she's like, how old are you? And she's like, 8 years old. And she's like, 8? It's been 8 years. It's like, my name's Ren. It's like, no, your real name is Mo. I was like, shut up. I was like, wait, we time skipped? I was like, oh God, it's like season 9. Because like this show has had time skips, but it's never been massive amounts of times like that. Because that's where I was like never clear on the time frame in which this show was taking place. Because obviously, like, once again, time frame wise, World Beyond took place the furthest in the past, because that was still like 10 years after the world collapsed. Walking Dead was at the 12-year mark, and it was still unclear on where Fear stood. And I don't know if this takes, once again, not having not yet finished Walking Dead, I don't know where this puts it time frame wise. Is it completely caught up with The Walking Dead at this point in time? Because obviously by the time this show started, it didn't, like, that was still before Walking Dead had its time skip post Rick, being shipped off and everything. So, because that was like, wasn't that like a 5-6 year time skip there? So that's why I'm like, this feels like where the show currently was 12 years, after like the outbreak of everything, like the fall. It seems like now Fear was caught up at least at that time, because I don't know if in the series finale, there's stuff where I was in the final season where it felt like they were going to do some time skippy stuff. So that's where I'm like, where things currently are, it's probably a situation of like where things were before any series finale stuff. It was probably the same time frame that Fear is probably currently in that same time frame. But it was like, 8-year time skip, because this is the biggest time skip that the show has kind of had so far. So like I said, I think it is just this show's way of playing catch up in the final season. But it's like, wait, so if you're here, it's like, what happened to Morgan? Like, there's no way Morgan would like, no, it's like, because for Madison, it's like, no, you got away. Like, how is it that you're still here? So she gets Ren off because Ren wanted to go to the island, the mainland anyway, because she wants to fight, because she believes in what Padres says, and she wants to do her part. Because for her, she feels like when she looks out towards the mainland, so she feels like there's something missing, and now we know she figured out what it was that was missing: her mom and dad. Because she's like, she was a baby at the time, so she doesn't fully remember, but on some level back then, the trauma and all of that is still there. She just wasn't able to kind of like verbalize like what it represented, because she could fight, but every time it came to walkers, she would freeze because she kept having like this PTSD flashback. So Madison is doing everything she can. She's being very patient with Ren, because you're just almost like oh, you little brat, you broke my oxygen tank, I need that to live. You're like being defiant at every moment, trying to contact Padre, and ultimately they end up running into Morgan, which I'm like, oh, I was like, that is weird. I wasn't expecting, like, I thought this would just be a Madison Ren thing. All of a sudden you pop up, oh, it's because you work for Padre now. I'm like, what the hell happened? And when Morgan was kind of getting very dodgy, being like, oh, I don't want to talk about what happened, I'm like, did Grace die? I was like, well, I know there was some scenes I saw of Grace and Morgan, but I'm like, well, that's the past stuff. It wouldn't be the first time they've killed a character and still showed them in flashbacks and stuff like that. So I was like, yeah, wouldn't put it past him. I was like, that's heartbreaking if Grace is dead. Jumping ahead a little bit, we find out she's not. So I'm like, okay, interesting. Because especially with some of those flashbacks when he was kind of talking to Ren, Mo, I thought that might have been him trying to talk to like Grace or something, and that's what indicated in my head thinking, oh, something must have happened to Grace. So, but Morgan wants to tend her back to Padre, because he's like, right, they can do so much more for her. They can keep her safe, which I'm like, what happened to you, Morgan? After everything you've been through, but then again, that in itself answers the thing. It's a double-edged sword of everything you've been through. Of course, you do whatever it takes to protect your daughter, but at the same time, because of everything you've been through, you do whatever it takes to protect your daughter. So it's like one side is like, hey, I'll keep her close because that's how I'll protect her. But because of everything I've been through, the dangers she's been in, I know I can't, because I can't do it. I mean, literally couldn't stop nuclear weapons from being fired because of Teddy. So it's like, yeah, like if Padre can keep her safe, build a better world, because, you know, it broke him, but we find out why it broke him, because they were surrounded, they were kind of backed into a corner. The only people he could call in for help was Padre, because we don't know where the others were, because Padre lied and said like, hey, the others are being processed. We don't know if that was true or not. But it seems like it is true, because Morgan's talking to Madison later on. It's like, oh, what happened to everyone on the boat who was up there? And it's like, not people you would know, because most of the crew is people that Madison wouldn't know, except for Daniel, Luciana, and Victor are the only ones that she would know from the OG group. Obviously, she got a lot of history with specifically Daniel and Victor, but obviously just as much with Luciana, especially because of everything between her and Nick. But it's like, yeah, those would be the only like three. Because even she's like, what about Victor? It's like, no one saw him on the raft when they got. It's like, we don't know where he is. But it's Victor Strand. Strand is fine. He's probably flourishing somewhere up to something. I mean, like, he flip-flops so much, because he's like, you hate Victor. That hate never completely goes away. Even when he attempts to redeem himself, it's just kind of like where things stood between him and Alicia. I want him and Madison to have some scenes. So I need that. I need that. I need that in my life, especially because how much he latched on to her, to Alicia, because Alicia was kind of like, I mean, him and Madison always had that like complicated partnership where it's like we both recognize the bad in each other, and we actually kind of help influence the bad in each other, but we also try to keep each other good. And that's what he wanted Alicia to be. Hey, you were kind of my excuse to be good, but you were also my excuse to push you away so I could be bad. So they're going to have a lot to talk about once, you know. I mean, nothing Victor does can completely surprise her, because she's known how duplicitous Victor has been in the past, so. I mean, especially because like that family has always had special ties, and I mean, because Victor always took like a took Nick under his wing and everything, and then got so close to Alicia after Nick. And obviously him and Madison were always like, once again, it's a twisted, interesting, and complicated friendship they had. But yeah, I thought when Morgan ended up pulling out his gun, like he was going to like kill Madison, which she was kind of fine with, but it's also like I can't let things stand the way they are because I need to get you and your dad away from this Padre situation. I made that promise not only to save Mo, but to save Morgan too. And it's like, I'm not going to stop. Even if it's my last breath, it's the last thing I do. I'm going to keep that promise. I thought I kept it all those years ago, but it's, I guess like being trapped down there, she's been locked in there the entire time. So even though she's taking tallies, like all of it kind of got, I'm sure it's all a little bit of a blur, especially when you're literally giving up and you're trying to unalive yourself. Like it probably makes the time pass by even faster. So it's like, wait, 8 years. Not only has it been 8 years, Mo's still here, so the entire time Ren is still fighting to go back because she believes in this. She's kind of been brainwashed into the cult that is Padre. So, because obviously they've been told to kind of believe like parents are terrible people. But as she's spending more time with Morgan and Madison tells her the truth of like, right, they take the thing that you love and they try to use it against you. In my case, they promised like, hey, they knew where my kids were, but they didn't. Most of my kids are dead and Padre had lied to me just to manipulate me into doing some terrible stuff. So Morgan and Madison and Ren find themselves in the exact same situation Morgan was in all those years ago. Once again, he's avoiding telling Ren anything about the past. She sees this like graffiti and she's like, what's all this? And he's like, don't worry about it. And it's like, well, what's going on? And it says like King County and Dwayne and Jenny, which I'm like, Dwayne is definitely his son's name, but I was like, it's Jenny? Was that his wife's name? It's been so long that I didn't remember that. I remember Dwayne, but I didn't remember Jenny. And I guess King County is where they were from in Georgia. If I remember correctly. So I don't know if like because they were locked down here, he needed something like to try and get Mo to focus on. Maybe that's what that was about, or maybe he's come back to this boathouse from time to time. I don't know. Or it holds some significance, not only about it's the last time he saw Mo all those years ago, but also like those names tagged like in the wall like that and stuff. It's pretty significant in that regard. But also when she ended up picking up the music and everything, I was like, oh, I mean, obviously that runs even deeper because it's like, right, you have a sibling you didn't know about that you never got to meet, Athena. So there's that, but also it's like the music was so warped at the beginning because you're like, it's been even longer, so like those tapes are probably even more warped, but then it started playing. That air in itself made me go like, oh, that made me doubly go like, Grace must be dead then or something. The way Morgan keeps avoiding the topic. But, right, they're without a radio. They don't know if Padre's going to show up to back them up. So it's like, right, we got to get out of here. And finally, through it all, listening to the music, being stuck in the exact same situation, Ren finally remembers what happened. She was like, we were stuck in the same situation. And he's like, yes, I failed you before. I'm not going to do it again despite our circumstances. Madison's over there willing to sacrifice herself just so they can get away. But Ren doesn't want to leave her behind to die. Luckily, enough time passed that Grace showed up. And I was like, because my brain being what it is, I'm like, is this for real or is this all some ploy? As in like Morgan and Grace are playing along. This is the long game to try and take down Padre. Once again, we don't know where I guess everyone's kind of scattered to the wind doing their own thing. All the crew from the rafts and stuff. But I also thought about it too. It clicked in my head this episode, especially when they were dealing with the walkers. I was like, I guess the radiation isn't much of an issue anymore, is it? I guess like because like Ren had asked earlier in the episode, where do you get these walkers from? She's like, from the same place. So it's definitely not it has to be from certain places in the mainland. Obviously the radiation only hit it hit a widespread area, but a certain area of the country. So they probably pull them from places where obviously last thing you want to be dealing with is radioactive walkers. So I don't know if that's something we'll be dealing with at all anymore this season, but I don't know. Because there's still got to be some floating around out there. But all of this, and I thought was so interesting, just when Morgan and Grace are doubling down, Ren has changed her mind because it's like, no. She's like, Padre told me the reason why like parents are selfish and everything, they don't care. That's why they gave up. But it's like, you weren't selfish. You sacrificed. You didn't want to turn to Padre, but you did. You sacrificed so much to make sure I was okay. Both of you did. Because like the way Grace and Morgan were around each other, because Morgan had to make that decision on his own, I'm like, it probably means like Grace and him aren't close like they used to be. Obviously, they're working different jobs, but I'm also, because she works with like making sure the radios are okay. He's a collector. I'm sure they don't see each other at all, and even when they do, they probably avoid each other like the plague because it's too much of a reminder of the baby. They're losing their daughter. They had already lost one child beforehand, so I mean, especially let's not forget Grace went through that whole dream sequence of having met her daughter older and everything, and just to lose the baby, and then on top of that, this was kind of like that second chance. You know, it's not meant to be like a replacement for Athena, Mo's her own person, but it still had to cut just as deep to lose her. So I'm sure they're not in a good spot either. So it probably put like a major damper on their relationship. Once again, if they're even around each other at all because of their jobs. I'm sure Padre also wants to keep them as separate as possible. I kind of sitting here thinking about it. Once again, that entire crew's been through a similar thing with like the whole Virginia situation. She was in the exact same boat. I kind of like let it because it's been a while. I do constantly forget. Right, the actress who plays Virginia is the actress who plays Ashley. I'm blanking on her last name, but her name's Colby, if I remember correctly. Colby Menifee. She plays Ashley on The Boys, so it's just like I constantly forget about that until I start remembering season 5/season 6, and I was like, Ashley. The tangents and all that aside, like they've been in that boat, like I said, of like being separated. I mean, to be fair, they were heavily separated last season with all the nuclear waste and stuff like that. Obviously, there were like pocket groups and such, but still. But like getting back to the point I was making, despite all of the changes that Ren is now experiencing, I guess these 8 years have done a lot to Morgan and Grace that they're not willing to fight this. It's like, we're doing what's best for our daughter. But even Madison's like, what does Padre have over you? Because they've got to be using something against you for you to be willing to, like, you were fighting so hard to keep your daughter, and now because I guess it's also their spirits have been broken because Morgan had to make that decision all those years ago to sacrifice being with her just to keep her safe. So Padre people do show up. They send Grace off. They capture Madison again. And also, for whatever reason, Padre's taken such an interest in Mo, and I just don't know why. I guess maybe because of her circumstances, like you see something in her. She's a very special case because of, I guess, like the group she's always been a part of. Like there's something instilled inside of her. Like maybe it's like, I see in you something special. Why Padre latched onto her specifically, I have no idea. Because I was about to say, it's not like she's even, I mean, but that doesn't mean anything. But I thought, like, I don't know if it's like it's not even like a blood, like, oh, the blood's running through your veins. It's like, I mean, even Morgan said, it's like, right, we're not your parents. Your parents were Isaac and Rachel, and they're dead. And Rachel made me promise that we take care of you and make sure you grew up okay. And this is them in their own way keeping that promise, because they felt like any other way they wouldn't be able to keep that promise. So, but now that Red knows about Morgan, he's taken off collection duty, which we found out he was skirting around the whole collection thing. He wasn't taking the child from parents that, unless they were willing parents being like, right, do what's best for my child, kind of like him, but even he was forced into a corner in that situation, or children that had already lost their parents. So he kind of found a loophole around it, doing that, but also having at least somewhat of a conscience while doing it. But now he's being taken back, and we have no idea what that means for him. The fact is, obviously, you know, at least they got to see Ren, but Grace is like, yeah, but that's what makes it that much harder. That line made me go like, wait, is this some plan? Or were you just saying like, right, we never thought we'd get to see her at all, but, you know, it's still it's great, but it also is heartbreaking because it's a reminder of the 8 years we didn't have together and how we can never be around her because we are doing this for her sake. So maybe a combination of all of it. But like I said, I just feel like it has to be a ploy, but I don't think it. I'm so split because I feel like 50-50, like either it is a ploy, this is all some long con, or they got swept up in this BS because they were so brokenhearted and they were put in such a position that they kind of have to accept the way Padres running things and kind of like believe that, they had to sip the Kool-Aid essentially, But Ren is going back and she's doubling down when it comes to Padre. Like, no, I believe in all of this. I saw what was out there, and it's like I'm redoubling my efforts working towards all this. But we can tell it's all a ploy. But she's also not the same person she was. Came in there with the sledgehammer and she killed a walker. She also didn't bother putting on the mask. I guess it looks almost like a fencing mask. I don't know if it seems like that's what it's supposed to be. Kind of like almost symbolic of like it's supposed to almost be like a fencing mask, but it's not, I don't think. But where this all will take us, I have no idea. I avoided watching the trailer, so I have no idea what to fully expect from this season. I think I watched it, I skimmed through it enough to get like a thumbnail for this month's watch list, to include a picture of it. But that's about it. I avoided paying attention to any details other than that, so I don't know what to expect. I mean, the news broke maybe late last month that this was going to be the final season, because it wasn't originally, because when it got renewed last year, it wasn't announced at the time. I guess they changed their minds because I think AMC is shifting stuff around because I think it's just all the money being spent and I don't think they're making as much money. I think they're kind of losing money, so I think a lot of that might play in a role. So I don't know. I would assume the creators and everyone got heads up about this going into its final season. At least The Walking Dead, it was super clear that, we're going into this 11th season being the final season. Excluding spin-offs and stuff like that. But it felt like it was a not last minute decision, but after it was already renewed that they were going to go, hey, this next season of Fear is going to be the last. So I just looked into it because I was curious, okay, so is this final season going to be the normal 16th length? Nope. This season is going to be shorter. It's going to be divided up into it's a total of 12 episodes divided up into 2 6-part seasons, which is so interesting. I was like, that's interesting. I mean, kind of makes sense. The Walking Dead getting a 24-episode final season was kind of an anomaly because most shows don't get a longer final season. They usually get condensed final season, so it seems like Fear's getting that treatment. So I'm assuming things are going to move pretty fast because they have 4 less episodes than they typically would. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see. Obviously, this entire episode only revolved around Madison, Mo, and mainly Morgan, obviously with a little bit of Grace, but once again, we don't really know even who Padre is, but that's also not too out of the realm for Walking Dead. You follow one group in an episode, maybe you'll bounce back and forth between some in a single episode, but a lot of times it's just you focusing on one group. So obviously there's still so much to wonder about, who's still out there, what are they up to. Once again, Victor being the biggest question mark. Alicia's story, that's probably that probably got all handled off screen, she died trying to do what she did. Or maybe we'll get one final appearance once again with her and Madison having any on screen stuff. Who knows? Once again, I did not watch the trailer. I don't want to know what was in the trailer, so please don't let me know because I want to go into this final season knowing as little as possible. So I'm so excited to see where this final season takes us, how this all comes to an end, where the next episode takes us with all of this. Who will live, who will survive, who will die, because final seasons is the place to start dropping bodies, especially in this universe. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. To the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and good